And, we talk about pro wrestling, we talk about metal. And I think the first thing we should talk about, just because it's probably going to take up a lot of talking time, it's going to be the first ever Starrcade. Starrcade 1983, brother. The thing that started it all.
Absolutely.
So, Allison, can you give us a little backstory on Starrcade?
Well, so my backstory on Starrcade is going to be a little bit one-sided because to me, as I've mentioned many times on the show, Jim Crockett Promotions was what wrestling was to me. It was the only wrestling I could watch when I was a kid, when I was growing up. I couldn't watch the WWF. I couldn't watch Mid-South. I could only watch Jim Crockett. So this is what wrestling is to me. So Starrcade was like the first big national show, probably. It was like WrestleMania before WrestleMania, kind of. It's just that Vince McMahon was able to capitalize on his version quicker. But I'm pretty sure that the first WrestleMania was inspired by Starrcade to happen.
Oh, yeah.
But it's also kind of a transitional period in wrestling. So it's like it transitions from like 1970s wrestling to what wrestling would become in the 80s. And they even talk about it during the show. Like I watched the show before we recorded, and like they even talk about that. Like they talk about how Jim Crockett is like the leader in this new era of wrestling. And the main event, which was Ric Flair versus Harley Race, was kind of like a symbolic changing of the times from a really famous 1970s wrestler to a young new 1980s era wrestler.
Yes,
in a way.
Our flair for the gold.
Yeah, no Dusty Rhodes yet.
No. So, I mean, there was Dusty Rhodes. So, the interesting part about Dusty Rhodes on the show, besides him doing a bunch of interviews, one of them that didn't even, go through, because they had some audio technical difficulties, was, the original Starrcade idea was the brainchild of Dusty Rhodes. Because I think he was the one that came up with the idea. It's like, what if we just do a mega event? Like, that hasn't been done in wrestling. We have tours and we have shows that we have done in wrestling. But what if we bring all matches, like all big time attraction matches, all in one show? And that's pretty much how Starrcade was born, because we have matches that you might have seen in Puerto Rico, matches you might have seen in Mexico, matches you might have seen on house show main events. What if we bring them all to one big giant show? And that's pretty much how the Starrcade event came to be. So.
Yes. Yeah, but Dusty, he was at the show, and the show was his idea, but he wasn't wrestling, I don't think, for Crockett yet. I could be wrong.
I think he was.
But I don't think he was.
I think he might have been wrestling for Crockett around the time. I think like he's probably he didn't blow up yet. Like he was about to be a big star coming on for them.
Right.
So. Let me see. And there's a couple interesting facts about Starrcade that are, probably a little more. It's hard to go into detail because it'd probably take up a whole show. So maybe one day or here and there, me and Allison were talking about. Sometimes we do like that Lights Out episode, and maybe one time on the Lights Out episode we might pick a particular wrestling event to talk about, and we can go a little bit more detail in the history and everything. The Retro Blood is kind of like just hitting on what was happening during these movies' release date. But it's pretty crazy to think like that around the same time as Sleepaway Camp came. Like we had the first ever Starrcade, which is crazy. But do you have any some thoughts from the show?
The show was really good. It was strange for me in a way because I got to see. I don't know that I don't think I've ever watched this entire show before. Before now. But, obviously I'm familiar with Ric Flair, but, and I'm familiar with all of these people. Like I know who the Briscoe brothers were.
Yeah.
But to me, the Briscoe brothers were the Stooges in WWF.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Like I don't I never really saw them as the dominating tag
Well,
team. I
think during that particular time, Jack it was already retired, and he was running their body shop when Gerald was the Stooges. But
true. Yeah, you're right. It was Pat Patterson and one of the Briscoes.
Yeah, it was Gerald Briscoe. Yes, yeah. But the interesting part about the Briscoe brothers, not the newer Briscoe brothers, but the older ones. Jack, he was a former NWA world champion, and he was one of their big traveling world champions at the time. I don't think Gerald ever got to that level, but they were both like very credible amateur wrestlers, and that's why. Gerald Briscoe, he was the one that worked for the WWF and recruiting a lot of amateur wrestlers to the WWF because of their big background that they had. And boy, those guys can go. That's for sure.
Yeah. I mean, amateur wrestling has turned out to be a really good feeding ground or farm for professional wrestlers over the years, for sure.
Yes. It's hard to go over to the whole card, you know what I mean? But like basically some of the highlights that when I was watching it from it. First of all, we had
Gordon Solie.
Yes, we had Gordon Solie on commentary. And boy, at first he could not get Tony Schiavone's name.
I was going to mention that. This must have been like right when Schiavone started because he keeps calling him Tony Schiavone.
Yeah, Schiavone. Yeah. And Tony Schiavone, just like nowadays, he was all over this show doing interviews. I mean, man, just like him in AEW is like all over the show. It's like he was like doing interviews with Harley Race. He was doing interviews with Ric Flair. He was doing interviews with Ricky Steamboat. He was doing interviews with Bob Orton. I mean, he's fucking all over this damn show. But I like the internet form. So this is like this particular era of wrestling. It seemed a little bit more like realistic. You know what I mean? It seemed more like a sporting event than what we see kind of even nowadays. Like a lot of nowadays, we have like really high production. You know what I mean? Everybody you could tell like has like at least some bullet points or scripted lines they're going through. We got to hit all these bullet points. This show was basically just like, okay, we're going to go to the back. All right, we have humble Ric Flair talking about his match coming up with the Harley Race, and everybody just kind of hanging out, putting on their tape and everything. So this, like, the format of the whole show was very, very different than you would see nowadays. But, for the time, that this is just how wrestling, was.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, and it was weird. I will say it was weird seeing this Ric Flair character. Like the babyface Ric Flair.
Well, we've seen this character before. So, Ric Flair, to me, always had like two sides. He had the wild, rich, the most flamboyant, Ric Flair that we're pretty much used to. Talk about his suits, yelling at everything, screaming, freaking out the whole time. Talking about women, talking about jets and stuff. That is like the most popular version of Ric Flair. But there's always the other side of Ric Flair, which is the humble Ric Flair. The humble Ric Flair that we got on this show. He's very quiet, very low spoken. He's like, yes, I got my opponent over here, Harley Race. He's a great athlete. I will go in there and make sure this is a great competition. This is a great show that's happening right now. Jim Crockett Promotions. This is going to be a great world title match. Like, he's just very low spoken. He did the same thing when it was the Ric Flair and Vader feud as well too. We have more of the humble Ric Flair. So every once in a while we'll get the humble Ric Flair, but everybody, when you see Ric Flair, hear Ric Flair, you're used to the wild side, man, the wild one,
right?
Which is It is more entertaining seeing the wild heel Ric Flair than it is seeing the babyface humble Ric Flair. So it's like two different personalities. It's just crazy.
For sure. I mean, they're totally different.
Yep. And of course, this show was very interesting too because this one had one of the most famous matches on the card besides the Flair versus Harley Race. It had the Rowdy Piper versus Greg Valentine dog collar match. Mm-hmm. That's still even recognized today. Yeah,
in AEW, and still recognized as one of the best matches of all time, which it certainly was. And this Piper was the face, which you don't normally think of as Roddy Piper as a face, although he would kind of go back and forth over time. But he was the face in this really bloody dog collar match where he nearly got his ear ripped off by mistake.
Yes, the year of the ear. Let it be known. And this is just one of the most violent, very creative match that you would see for this time. How these two athletes did it. A lot of back and forth, a lot of like using the chain, using the dog collar chain very differently than you would even see it today. But some of the interesting facts about this show too is, it's very interesting to see how a bunch of wrestlers went back and forth in this era. So, around the 80s and stuff, like, nowadays, let's say somebody jumps to AEW. Oh, we got Bryan Dance, we got CM Punk. Like, it's like, oh shit, I can't believe this is happening. We got Cody jumping, you know what I mean, to Monday Night Raw. It's like, whoa, this is shocking. Back then, that shit happened like all the time. Like, it was crazy to think that Roddy Piper would have this killer match with Greg Valentine at this Starrcade show. And not even a couple months later or a year later, he's in WWF.
Yeah, both of them were pretty soon, right?
Yeah. So, he finished out his contract with the Jim Crockett, and then boom, he's on to the WWF and just takes this whole big run over there. So, and you would think like this was like pretty much a star-making match. You think he'd be one of the premier people to want to even stay in Jim Crockett Promotions. He probably could have got up to be huge, and now obviously you could tell that Roddy Piper was going to be a huge star, but that McMahon money came knocking.
Yeah. I mean, none of those guys could turn down that kind of money, and I mean, I don't know what their contracts were then, but I would imagine that back then it was a little bit different because you didn't, most people didn't, I don't think, really wanted to be on a big contract before this. Like, guaranteed money was like working on salary to them, from what I understand. Now, this is obviously not from experience, but it's from hearing people talk about it that were there around in that era, and they wanted to be paid on, based on how the show did. So it's like the difference between working on, commission, I guess, or working hourly maybe, and then working for a salary, because no matter how much you work, you're going to make the same amount of money. Where today people want that guaranteed money, but back then they wanted maybe little less guaranteed money, but they wanted to be paid a higher amount on the show. So like, if you main evented a show, then you got a huge payday versus, you just got whatever you got.
Yeah.
So I guess it cuts both ways really, but yeah, I think that Vince started offering people huge guaranteed contracts, and some of those guys were just like, yeah, sure, I'll just take that and go.
Yep. And the card, it was very interesting in this card too. So a lot of the people on this card would, eventually be pretty, big stars, legendary stars when it comes to, pro wrestling too. I mean, we have like Kevin Sullivan. He was on this show.
Yep.
Obviously, he would be a booker for WCW later, especially during the Monday Night War era. A very interesting match that I actually got to watch a little bit. I didn't get to finish this whole show, just like you, but I just kind of want to talk about this a little bit. Was the Abdullah the Butcher versus Carlos Colon match?
Yeah, the one that was banned in Puerto Rico.
Yes, it was banned in Puerto Rico because are they okay? Is this when Bruiser Brody died?
No, Brody didn't die until 85.
Okay, so this is before that happened. So I guess this match was just banned in Puerto Rico because it was too violent, brother.
Yeah, so when they said that, I thought that was a weird thing to say because from everything that I've ever heard about Puerto Rican wrestling,
yeah, I heard it was crazy.
There is no way.
No.
There is no way that this would have been banned in Puerto Rico.
Maybe they just said it to make it sound special.
Because I'm sure it did. I'm sure it was like, this is crazy.
And I didn't realize that Abdullah Butcher just uses his fork in every match. Like they didn't They didn't say this match was no disqualification. They didn't say it was anything goes. They were just like, okay, this match was banned in Puerto Rico. Here they go. And then next thing we know, fucking Carlos Colon just brings out a knife and starts stabbing this motherfucker in the head. I was like, what the fuck is going on here? I was like, what the fuck?
Yeah. They don't explain any rules. I've never seen an Abdullah the Butcher match that didn't involve a fork or something sticking in his opponent.
Yeah.
But what was different about this one was like Carlos Colon was like the first one to pull out like a blade to start stabbing him in the head. And I'm like, holy shit.
And it was crazy too, because like, I didn't realize how over this Carlos Colon was. Like the crowd was loving this guy. So he was great.
I mean, he was a huge star for sure.
And then we had Hugo, the manager. Who did I say his name? Hugo Savinovich.
Sorry, my favorite thing about doing this show is listening to you try to pronounce names.
I know. I suck at it. I suck at the names. I don't know why. What's his name?
I mean, it is a hard name to say. Hugo Savinovich. He's the guy that did the Spanish commentary for a long time for WWF, and he works in AAA now. And I didn't know he was ever a manager. I assumed he was a commentator his whole career. This is when he showed up, I was like, holy shit, it's Hugo Savinovich.
Yes, me too. I was like, oh shit, what? The Spanish announcer table guy.
Exactly.
Great. So another great match that I'm going to talk about was Bob Orton Jr. and Dick Slater. What a great team. The Cowboys versus the Indians. Mark Youngblood and Wahoo McDaniel.
So I didn't even think of it that way until you just mentioned it. But yeah, it's the Cowboys versus the Indians. Yes. Bob Orton is I watched this all the way through. This was a good match. Bob Orton is a better wrestler than I ever gave him credit for.
Oh, he's great. He's fantastic.
One thing that's really strange is when I'm watching him wrestle, I can see Randy Orton in him.
Yes.
Like in his face and his facial expressions.
Oh yeah.
I was like, holy shit. That's what Randy does now.
Yeah.
Like he's just like his dad. Because I never thought he looked anything like his dad. But I mean, it's mostly because, Bob Orton had that big curly hairdo all the time. And Randy doesn't have hair like that.
The suplex off the top rope, he took that from his dad too. Because his dad used to do that one all the time.
Yep. I mean, it actually made me appreciate Randy Orton a lot better. Watching this, because I was like, yeah, that's Randy's remake of his dad for sure.
And and it's crazy. So there, out of this show, there was 2 people from this show that were also on the original WrestleMania 2, which is crazy. It's Bob Orton Jr. and Rowdy Piper. So not only were they in the original Starrcade, they were also in the original WrestleMania as well.
Yeah, which would happen in '85, right?
Yes.
So when did Hulkamania start? When wasn't this the same month that Iron Sheik lost to Hulk Hogan to start Hulkamania, or was it the next year? Oh, I know we've talked about this before, but I can't remember what year it was. I can't remember if it was 83 or 84.
I think it was 84, to let you know.
That kind of makes sense, maybe, because I thought Rocky 3 was 1983.
Yeah.
And that was well before he was still working for Vern Gagne. Hulk Hogan was still working for Vern Gagne, I think, when he made that. So it would have been maybe the next year. So all these guys went to WWF, and then Hogan was already positioned, I guess, to be the big star, which is why the big face star, which is why Piper became a heel when he went to WWF, I suppose.
Yeah, the rise of Hulkamania. It was 84, basically, when he became the. Now, he was already a big star during this time, because when he worked in the AWA, that's pretty much where he, like you're saying, he came off Rocky 3, and he was just, bringing the whole Hulkamania persona in the AWA first. But then Vince snatched him up, and then they kind of like made the rise of that, and that mostly happened in 84.
Yeah, almost. I want to say it was almost exactly a year later. I'm pretty sure it was November of '84. But I mean, I could be wrong about that. I'm just trying to bring that back from memory. But I believe that match in Madison Square Garden happened in November of '84. So basically, they were setting all of this up for everything they were going to do through the rest of the '80s in this year, which is kind of interesting to think about.
Yes. And another great tag team I kind of want to talk about a little bit is the Jay Youngblood and Ricky Steamboat. Like, boy, you could talk about these guys were like a fantastic team. Yes. 2 great young baby faces, great wrestlers, great look. They had a great, excellent match with Jack Briscoe and Jack and Jerry Briscoe. So definitely a very interesting, time, especially for the tag team wrestling when it comes to these guys, just killing it in the ring.
Well, I wonder why they had. I wonder why they split the brothers up. I wonder why Mark and Jay didn't tag together. Maybe because they had to have Wahoo on the card, and they wanted another Native American to be a tag team partner.
That's possible. But which is interesting too, eventually Ricky Steamboat would also be another person jumping back and forth a bunch to the Fed and WCW at this time too.
And what happens at the end of the show is kind of ironic compared to what would happen later with him and Flair. But since you're bringing up the Young Bloods, I came up with a theory last night, but I ended up debunking my own theory. Because I was thinking about, so the Briscoes were on this show, the Briscoe brothers, and the Young brothers, Jay and Mark. And I was like, did the current Briscoe brothers take their names from the old Briscoe brothers and Jay and Mark Youngblood? But when I started investigating that, Mark and Jay are their actual names.
Yes.
So that's probably not true.
It seems like that though, doesn't it? It's just crazy.
It seems like it would be cool, but yeah, if they did that, but yeah, if they took their first and last names from two, pretty famous hard hitting tag teams, but yeah, their actual first names are Mark and Jay. So my conspiracy theory was totally debunked.
That happens. But yeah, I mean, definitely a very legendary show. Definitely a big, one of the biggest influential cards in pro wrestling, because this, like we were saying at the beginning, is probably the thing that gave the idea to WrestleMania in a way. WrestleMania was more about, let's get the wrestling mixed in with pop culture pageantry all in the one for like some sort of big mega card. Starrcade was more like, let's get a bunch of high profile matches and high profile stars all onto one televised show. So they basically just took the two concepts. They made them a little different, but they're the same style of concept, where it's a big show, a big showcased show.
Right. Yeah. I mean, back then, Crockett didn't have the vision that Vince McMahon had of being able to, I'm willing to bet that he never even thought that, well, we're going to be able to integrate pop culture as a whole into what we do with this wrestling thing. Whereas Vince McMahon was like, we need to take MTV and current music and see if we can get any musicians involved in this, and then see if we can mix it all together and make everybody in the country see this.
Yeah. So yes. So definitely a big show. Definitely a very highlighted show. Maybe if on the Facebook, if I find a match, I'll play one for everybody to check it all out. We'll do a couple extras for everybody here. But let's get into some of the music around the release date of this film. So, a couple of things I found. I found two things, basically. So the first one I found was it's a Black Sabbath show, like a concert that happened on the exact same date, November 18th, 1983, that this movie dropped. And it was in Chicago at this time. So, Black Sabbath, obviously a big band. We talked about them before on the podcast.
Mm-hmm.
I just wanted to bring that up a little bit, But there's something I really wanted to bring up here, and I've been waiting to talk about this for a long time. So this didn't happen in the same month that Sleepaway Camp happened, but it was super close. So this album dropped December 3rd, 1983. So only a couple, maybe like 2 weeks after, Sleepaway Camp came out. And this album is awesome. So it's the first ever album dropped by the one and only Slayer. So we have Show No Mercy by Slayer that dropped December 3rd, 1983. So
wow. Yeah, that's weird to think about that was that long ago.
Yes.
And
a couple
Slayer.
Yeah. A couple of interesting facts about this album too. This is the studio album debut of obviously one of the most, famous metal bands of all time. And it was obviously, this is like, it was released on Metal Blade Records, which is still like one of the biggest labels. still kicking today. I guess it was signed by Brian Siegel.
Yeah.
He signed the band to the label after watching them perform the song Phantom of the Opera by Iron Maiden.
Right, which is weird to think. So they did an Iron Maiden cover.
Yes. And then apparently they basically what happened was, so when Brian, when he saw them perform that, he was going to be releasing kind of like one of those, they do this nowadays. They kind of release an album that has a bunch of different bands on one like little record, so everybody can get a taste of what the new bands are coming out with. They still do that nowadays too, because when I went to that Amorphous show in Ada, they had when I got their CD, they gave me a sample CD of a bunch of other bands that sound like them on the same record. So
Metal Blade started that way. They started releasing those compilations. Was it called Metal Massacre? Was that what?
Yeah, this one was the Metal Massacre 3 compilation.
Yeah. But these were new songs though. So like the songs on your compilation CD are probably releases from other current releases that you could buy. But the Metal Massacre releases had new songs from new bands that you couldn't get anywhere else at the time.
Nice. Well, some of the interesting stuff about it. So Slayer was the opening act for Bitch. You ever heard Bitch before?
Absolutely not.
Yeah, me either.
They did not last the test of time.
Yes. Bitch did not last the test of time. Well, I guess the word bitch did, but not the band.
Yeah, right.
It was at the Woodstock Club in Los Angeles, performing 8 songs, 6 being covers. While performing the Iron Maiden cover, the band was spotted by Brian, a former musical journalist who had recently founded Metal Blade Records. Mm-hmm. He met with the band and asked if they'd like to be featured on the upcoming Metal Massacre 3, and they agreed. So being on there, they created some underground buzz, which led to Brian signing the band to Metal Blade Records. So, and they recorded the album in Los Angeles, California, and it was financed by the lead singer, and so I guess the lead singer Tom, he was working as a respiratory therapist at this time, and he financed the album, and then they got some money borrowed from guitarist Kerry King's father. So, and they had a lot of influence, on the early sound. Obviously Iron Maiden was on there too, sound-wise. Venom, Judas Priest, and Merciful Fate were big influences to Slayer. And you could see that too because, Venom, Merciful Fate and stuff, they had the more like the satanic type of album covers and look, which Slayer adopted as well. And of course, Judas Priest and Iron Maiden, at the very early Slayer, the singer, Tom, he would do the what I like to call the screaming vocals.
Oh, yeah.
The yow.
So yeah.
That's
exactly what they sound like.
Well, I can't do it, brother. My fucking voice is too kill. I'd be like blowing my vocal cords out if I tried.
Yeah.
So.
But can you imagine like hearing this in 1983 though? Like this had to have been crazy to hear. Like there was, other than like hardcore music, there was nothing fast like that. Nothing that hard, that heavy, that fast.
Yeah.
That screaming. That must have been like, like a revolutionary thing. Hearing Show No Mercy.
Well, people were liking it because this album became the highest selling release that Metal Blade Records did at the time. So, the Slayer was, I wouldn't say they were like an instant hit, but they were like getting some buzz quick when this album came out. Like they were getting like, this is a band to see.
Yeah, so. They were huge. Until Metallica like eclipsed them, they were like the biggest thrash metal band. Well, there were very few thrash metal bands, I guess, but they were the biggest thrash metal band at the time for sure.
Yes. So, and then, So, back this day, too, you'd have your side 1 and side 2 of the record as well. Mm-hmm. So, and of course, on the imagery, we had the famous guy, the famous guy, he kind of looks like some Mortal Kombat character. He has like 2 swords in his hand, Slayer's logo's right there, too. So, this is a really good cover album as well.
Yeah, I mean, like that. I mean, that's one of the things that I think people don't do very well anymore. Is that you need to have an album cover that's gonna make somebody want to buy it. You know, and like if I saw that album cover in a record store, I'd be like, "Wow, what does this sound like?"
Yeah,
You know, that's album artwork there. People, it's a lost art. I think people just don't do that much anymore.
exactly.
They'll have some out of focus photograph of something and expect me to buy their record with that kind of shit on the front. But yeah, you need guys with swords and things that look violent and pentagrams, and that's what sells records.
Yes, got to get those gimmicks in, brother. So the tracks, the Antichrist, Die by the Sword, and Black Magic were probably like the most recognizable Slayer songs because that's the ones they were playing a lot at the live shows.
Mm-hmm.
So those were definitely
and still play.
And yeah, they
still play those all the way up to the end. Yeah.
Yep. So and then once the touring set off, it was pretty interesting. So like just a little backstory. When this album was hitting off. Like the Slayer, they had to find places to tour, and they're finally going to be going around, the U.S. and touring. So apparently, the guy who signed them, Brad, he like gave him like contact numbers and stuff to get a hold of these venues so they can get booked for the show. Mm. And the whole band, Tom was like, okay, we doing this? Like we're going this tour, let's just do it. So he left his job for a little bit, and they just went on tour. And did everything, and then for a while, like just like every newer type upcoming band, even if your CD is selling out pretty good, you still got to make your money, doing touring and stuff. And they were struggling for a little bit because they're still like probably at this time they're probably still like a little bit of opening acts for everybody, and they're just kind of like building their way up top so they could be the main act as well.
Oh yeah, I bet there were all kinds of bands that they were opening for that they were just completely blowing off the stage though.
Yes.
Like, I mean, they got somewhere in the Midwest or something and are opening for some like, I don't know, 70s inspired classic rock metal-ish band. And they're probably just blowing those guys completely off the stage.
Oh yeah, definitely. So what we'll do on the Facebook page, we'll play a little bit of Slayer from the show No Mercy. See if I can find some rare footage of these motherfuckers. But yeah, this shit was crazy, man. I would love to go to one of those like original Slayer shows.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
I mean,
that'd be awesome.
I mean, like, we definitely, we always talk about, how we would have acted and did, during the 80s. And I probably definitely would have got that Metal Massacre compilation because that seemed like something up my alley. I always like getting those kind of compilations so I can hear new bands. Like nowadays, you can go on, YouTube, Facebook, stuff like that. And you can hear new bands that way. There's a, if you have like Apple Music, if you have Spotify and stuff, you're listening to a band, they'll recommend another band. But, back in the day, it wasn't really like that. And, back in the day, it's very rarely on radio stations they would play this kind of metal music. I mean, there might be like maybe one you can find on there, possibly. But yeah, talking about, Slayer and everything, it's just crazy. We definitely would have been going on their shows and, trying to track them down during this particular time. It's definitely it's very interesting when you see a band like from their beginnings to when they rise up to fame and stuff. So.
Yeah, because that's interesting because that like those Metal Massacre like compilations are the only way we would have ever been able to hear this band.
Yeah,
you know what I mean, because the internet didn't exist, so like we would be able to maybe go in our local record store and get Metal Massacre and hear a Slayer track on it that we would never have heard otherwise. I do have one kind of quick story about local record stores during this time period, if you have time to hear that.
Go ahead.
Yeah, you might find that interesting. So on November 15th, now I don't remember exactly what day this happened to me, of course. But on November 15th was the day that Ozzy Osbourne released Bark at the Moon, which is like the first studio album he did after Randy Rhoads died. The one, it had the first one with Jake E. Lee playing guitar. And it's got, speaking of cool cover art, it's got this, it's got that werewolf cover on it that with Ozzy and the werewolf makeup, which I've always thought was just iconic. It's just an amazing cover. And in the mall here where we live, like there used to be a little family owned record store, which I can't remember what it was called. I want to say it was called Family Records, maybe even. but I could tell you, I could take you exactly to where it was. But I used to go in there and look at music while my mom was shopping or whatever as a little kid. And I can remember they had this huge, gigantic poster on the wall of Ozzy Osbourne's Bark at the Moon cover. And I thought I was so like intrigued by it. I thought it was the coolest thing I had ever seen. And that's actually what made me like search out like more metal, like Ozzy and things like that. Cause I thought that was the coolest thing I had ever seen. I can remember that to this day.
Yeah. Yeah. That's pretty cool. Like, I mean, I didn't know, speaking of finding bands and stuff, like, I think I talked about it before. Like most of the time when I was growing up as a kid, I was listening to some like R&B and rap and everything. It wasn't until I had actually moved to Texas and I became friends with the Bloodbeard, my another podcast host that I had on my different show. He was actually the one who introduced me to Slayer, and I remember it to this day. So there was this place in Texas where I lived. It was called the Vista Ridge Mall, and at this mall, they had a record store. I don't remember what I still remember big record stores. Like I remember Virgin Records. They used to have a big Virgin Record store in malls that I used to go to all the time, and we'd pick out like DVDs and CDs and stuff. I remember this particular one wasn't a Virgin Records. It was like something else. But, we get in there and he's like, hey, you ever seen this? I was like, what is this? It's a Slayer. He's like, you got to listen to this stuff. And I think the first Slayer album I got was the God Hates Us All one. But, then after that, I started listening to some of the earlier stuff and I was like hooked right away. So I bought like all their CDs. I still have all their CDs nowadays too. So it's always fun when I get to talk about Slayer because they're probably definitely my first thrash band or very first that type of music band I've ever listened to. So very, very, very fun.